Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
We got Randy Calvert all the way from Oklahoma. Where are you at in Oklahoma? Oklahoma City?
I'm in Oklahoma City today. I split my time with an office in Steamboat Springs, Colorado.
Not bad. I love Steamboat Springs. It's a little hard to get to unless you have your own plane, which fortunately you do. So it's a little easier to get to, but I've been skiing there quite a few times. And actually, it's crazy that I love Oklahoma City too, because I have done a fair amount of training for the Oklahoma City Public Defenders, at least a couple of trainings. And because I was brought in there by Billy Coyle and John Coyle. His nickname's Big Daddy. They're good friends of mine from the Trial Lawyers College. So do you know those fellas?
JW, love him.
JW.
I've known
JW.
known JW for almost 40 years.
Yep. I invited him to this conference and I consulted with him on a criminal case, this crazy criminal case that he won. It was this poor young man that was mentally disabled, charged with some sexual assault against his niece or something. It was crazy, but these government prosecutors get a little bit out of line occasionally, I normally never felt sorry for him until Trump fired about 1,000 of them, because they worked at the investigation. That's the first time my heart ever went out for federal agents and U.S. attorneys, but they are human at some level. You just got to really dig deep down. But I'm sure losing their job connected them with a little bit of humanity of being powerless, like a lot of people they prosecute. But anyways, Randy, tell us about how did you get to become a lawyer?
My path to become a lawyer had a few deviations. Actually, my first job was as a professional pilot during my undergrad. And while I was a flight instructor, I taught a number of attorneys how to fly.
Wait, I have a quick question. Are they all still alive, the people you taught to fly?
All the lawyers are still alive.
A couple of doctors bit the
all the doctors
turf.
are still, sadly, I did have one student die, but it was an exception. His father was the chief test pilot for Aero Commander, the twin turboprops, the 690s. Maybe before your time, but
probably. I'm pretty young.
And that airplane did have some mechanical issues. But this young man was an incredible pilot. I taught him to get, when he was working on his private license, he advanced very quickly. And not long thereafter, he had a commercial instrument, multi-engine, and he was doing a demonstration flight, trying to sell somebody a 690 Commander. He was in the left seat. There was the pilot for the buyer was in the right seat, and the guy that owned the airplane, the salesman, was standing up between them. Something happened on takeoff, I think mechanical, crashed and killed all three of them. That's my only student that died, but it stays with you.
I can, it's like a trial loss. It's almost like the death of a lawsuit. So sometimes it's so devastating. It feels pretty devastating when it happens. I know it sucks. Sucks for us all, but only trial lawyers know that what it feels like to work so hard to help somebody and fail. And that's life. So you've been the piloting. How'd you get started piloting?
Oh, I started that when I was 15. Got a job at the airport, worked on airplanes, traded out for time, soloed when I was 16, got my private license when I was 17. And then I took a little break. I was an exchange student in South America for a year. When I came back, it was January. I got a job in a factory. I was a United Steel worker, a welder, bought an airplane, built my time, got a commercial multi-engine flight instructor certificate. So when I started undergrad, I was a flight instructor. And as I was saying, the attorneys that I taught, they all discouraged me from going to law school.
You know what? That's like, when I ever hear that, somebody's like, oh yeah, I tell my kids never go to law school. I'm like, what kind of law do you practice? Because I think it's the coolest freaking job in the whole world. It's competitive. It pays well. You got a clear winner and a clear loser. And, it's fun. What else can you find that's fun? It's got camaraderie. It pays well. And you get to compete and win. It's certainly not medicine.
If you were this competitive on the golf course, nobody would want to play with you.
Yes, I've learned to temper my competitiveness on the golf course so I can still have fun. But my golf has been struggling based on, because whenever I got free time, I got to go build my hours and get my license because There's a lot going on in that airplane, and people don't realize, well, how much is like do you have to pay attention to simultaneously, and then when you're training and like you practice the stalls and stall, the plane drops and start like, not to be like freak out, just be like, oh, just put the throttle down, tip the nose down, get the acceleration, get the speed up, boom, it's as simple. But if you're not prepared, that kind of shit can, especially you got to be prepared for that. So when the instructor's not there, you're not like, you know,
Sure.
panicking. You can't be panicking. Oh, but you said you were a steel worker for 9 years. I mean, for 9 months.
No,
How was
not
that
math.
working in the plant?
It was great, steel-toed boots, and you're making something. I loved it. It was an honest living, and I was flying every day when I got off work. I'd work 7 to 3, and then I'd have, all afternoon and evening to fly.
That's pretty solid. And so these people discouraged you from being a lawyer. Obviously, it didn't stick, but
No. So my undergraduate was in accounting, passed the CPA exam, went to work for Arthur Young and Company, international accounting firm, as a management consultant. Thought I would find some business that I have an entrepreneurial spirit, so I thought I'd find some business that I liked, and took 7 years. And I decided, you know what I want to do is practice law. I want to be a trial lawyer. I want to try cases.
and how old were you when you decided this?
So 29.
29. So you got a little bit of a late start, just a few years, which,
I
because
did.
most people start
Yes.
that when they're about 21, 22, get that school done. And so you get your license when you're how old? 30, 33, 32, or
32. Yeah,
32?
32.
And so when you get your license, you got all this experience, you're a little bit older, you're not some young kid, just, fresh out of school with no experience. Where do you get started at in your career?
I really got a jump start because that was when all the savings and loans and banks had gone under, and the FDIC, RTC was suing all the directors, and all of the accounting firms of any size had audited. So they couldn't really get involved in that litigation because they were going to be defendants also. And so I got a lot of work helping defend, the board of directors of these different savings and loans. And I had the background from because of 7 years of being a CPA management consultant.
Uh-huh. And so you get started, were you working by yourself? Were you working for a firm? What was your
No, it was, those policies are eroding policies. All the defense costs, come out of the policy limits. And so the defendants they didn't have a whole lot of defenses, but CNA was like, well, all the money we spend to defend this, it's not like, we might be able to negotiate a better deal. And so there would be one law firm for each director, and then a law firm for the savings and loan, and then, a supervising attorney that was out of state. So, there'd be 10 or 12 law firms involved. What I was usually doing was I was working for just on specific like evaluating all the loan files to see what the losses were, and, how many different causes of action there were, how many policy limits there were.
but you were defending these people, not so you were just getting
It was
paid by the
hourly.
hour.
Yeah, it was hourly.
No, contingency's better.
No kidding. No kidding.
Like, really?
But
You're like a
but
genius.
it was a lot of work. I hired a bunch of people to help me, and that's how I paid off my first house. So
So
wasn't
you were
all bad.
working, so you started off working for yourself, not working
I
for
did.
somebody else, just hustling business. That's
Yeah.
that would make sense. And then after that, after the savings and loans, kind of disappeared, what was your trajectory from there? What was it? Because now obviously you're not doing that kind of work.
Yeah, I was always hustling cases. The first good contingency cases I got, the biggest bank in Oklahoma, I met the special assets director. He was down in the basement, and he said, I'll give you half of whatever you can collect out of any of these files in any of these file cabinets. It was really pretty easy. And it was 50% contingency, and away we go. Then I started doing like securities arbitrations, and, personal injury, just, whatever, just you're just out hustling.
Mm-hmm. Got to keep hustling, keep hustling. So Randy, I forgot to ask you about this, but like in high school, you did a little bit debating.
I did. I was a debate nerd.
The debate nerd. So how did like? And I always used to look at those people and think, what a waste of time to be hanging out with your friends and you're there practicing debate. But in hindsight, now that I have a little bit of wisdom, I can see the value. So what value, you know, would you like for people that have kids that are thinking about doing debate? What value did you get from the debating that you think helps you become, the trial lawyer you are today?
Yeah. Well, it's not just the debate. When you go to a debate term, you debate, but you also do extemporaneous speaking, oratory. But debate teaches you how to research, teaches you how to organize documents, how to flow arguments, and how to stand up in front of someone and make an argument.
That takes a lot of practice to be up in front of people where your mind or your nerves don't mess with you. Where you don't get those insecure thoughts like I'm not good enough to be up here, or these people aren't listening to me. Nobody cares what I have to say, until you're like, does you have the mindset of like, this is brilliant shit that's coming out of my mouth. People are mesmerized by me. They can't wait to hear the sound of my voice. They just wanted me to talk and never stop talking. Now, whether that's true or not is irrelevant. It's only if you believe it that's going to give you the presence up there and the confidence and the comfort up there to do this public speaking. So you get transitioned into personal injury and all kinds of cases, like a big array of cases. Like in your whole career, what would you say is your greatest victory, greatest accomplishment in the trial world?
Yeah, the old saying that the way you get $1 million verdict is you screw up a $3 million case.
Yes, I've heard this.
And so, I tend to measure results based upon expected outcomes. So my biggest is pretty clear. It was a case where we represented these women that owned a working interest that dated back to the 1920s. The oil companies hadn't paid it properly. And we settled with the first oil company. Shell Oil just thought that they would fight it. And we offered to settle that case with them for what they owed plus statutory interest that came to $3 million. So we offered to settle for $3 million. They said, no way. They'll drag this case out. Our clients will be dead before they see the money. And it was a long haul. I mean, it went all the way to a petition to the United States Supreme Court, but they ultimately paid us $83.6 million.
And that was after a jury trial?
After a jury trial. Yeah. The case went on long. We had an interlocutory appeal. We had 3 different judges. Shell, by the time it was over, Shell was using 7 different law firms and good law firms. I mean, Quinn Emanuel, we had Kathleen Sullivan. Have you heard of Kathleen? Probably wrote your con law textbook. Quinn Emanuel, Urquhart and Sullivan. She was on the short list to be on the United States Supreme Court.
I've definitely
Dean
heard
of
of Quinn
the
Emanuel. That's my
Yeah,
friend Elon's firm.
yeah. She was dean of the Stanford Law School. She filed the petition for cert to the United States Supreme Court. They had everything. They had Baker and Botts. They had Molo Lampkin. It took years. 7 motions for summary judgment, 3 judges, an interlocutory appeal, a jury trial.
And what year was that victory?
We collected that in 2010.
Wow. It's amazing. A lot of people would retire after a collection like that, but not you, buddy. And so it's too much fun to retire anyways. I mean, what the hell? People are like, oh, I can't wait to retire. I'm like, what would you do? And if there's that, I'm like, you need to find a new passion for this profession if you can't wait to retire. It's like, or if you hit one big, like, it's like, if I hit a big case like that, it'd be done. I'm like, that's why the good Lord will see you never do hit a case like that because He doesn't want you to be bored for your whole life.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of that case, the thing I think about most is when am I going to get a case where I can get a bigger result? I don't want that to be the biggest or the best result that I get in a case.
Oh yeah, like that's why I'm so excited to get back to the courtroom because I have been training and practicing this real hard now for the last 4 years, but before that, obviously my whole career. But like the verdicts these days are like
Oh yeah.
people only dream about this. Like this is a good time to be a trial lawyer with today's, crazy world we're in. And that's why I'm excited to get back into the game. But you and all your cases, you are heavy duty into focus groups. So how did
Yeah.
that come about?
It started 25 years ago. And I saw the value, and then the more you do it, the more value you see in it. About 10 years ago, we started a company to solicit focus group jurors. It's very important to have, a good juror in your focus group. And I saw people, getting focus group participants, from Craigslist or from unemployment agencies, or worse, I saw them reusing the same jurors over and over again. And I'm like, that's not who I see in the box. And so it costs a little money, but we do direct mail to people who have actively voted in person multiple times. And it's a, statistically correct sample from every precinct. We set up a website where they have a registration number, they get with their letter, they enter their demographic information. And so we've got a great pool of jurors whenever we want to do a focus group. And when it's not that expensive on a big case, I mean, we'll do 6 or 8 focus groups before a jury trial.
So if you're doing 6 or 8 focus groups before a big trial, kind of help me understand the procession of what each one. I assume you're not doing the same focus group over and over. So what's the procession of what you're testing or what skills you're practicing in these focus groups?
Sometimes you will repeat them. I like to do focus groups early before we do depositions. And my favorite focus group is a concept focus group where we sit down and we just slowly unpack the facts of the case and find out, what do they know about this area? What questions do they have? How do they view it? From the first focus group, a lot of times you're surprised. It's not the way you would have analyzed your case. And so you take it and refine it and do another focus group with what you learned from the first one. Or sometimes, like for example, I'll give you in that Shell case, the first time we focused it, what had happened was Shell was supposed to be sending an income statement to these people every month on 4 different producing units, and they were only doing it on 3. But there's a point when someone they sold the leases to the second oil company, and they got a letter that said, "Hey, we need to know the last statement you sent." And Shell documents, and there's a letter in their file where they say, here are the statements we sent on 3 of them. On the 4th one, of course, the 4th one's the huge well, the enormously profitable well. We haven't ever done statements for it. So they're acknowledging that they haven't paid. And so as we're unpacking this for the focus group, one of the men says, well, I think someone made a mistake and they just decided to let sleeping dogs lie. And the woman next to him says, mistake my ass. That money was sitting in that account. They knew that money didn't belong to them. And of course, my thought is, now what account? There's no account. But the point was that it's split on gender lines, which, that shouldn't happen. And the women, once they saw that breach of trust, they rolled back a bad intent from the first moment of the relationship. And the men were kind of like, oh, well, it was a mistake and they just wanted to sweep it under the rug. The women were having none of that. Well, that didn't make any sense. And so we just repeated it again and we got the same result again.
So Randy, we are now, I think, exactly 21 days away from TLU Beach, which I'm super excited about it because this is our 4th year doing the same hotel and, kind of refining what we've done every year. The first year we had 200 people. The second year we had like 300. The third year we had, the second year we had like 400. The third year we had 600. So I'm pretty sure it's going to be a pretty good crowd this year. And there's about little like 550 people registered right now. So it's kind of like a medium conference, but it's the greatest. We bought the whole hotel and, we do a full breakfast, full lunch for everybody every day, theme parties, 4 lecture tracks, 8 workshop tracks. and people who really want to become great trial lawyers, which is really what makes it unique and special. It's not just people showing up for CLE credits, or showing up because they want to go on vacation in some place and have a tax deduction. When class is going on, like literally 99% of the people are in a class because they have 12 choices. You got 12 choices, you're going to find something that fits for you. You're going to find something that you really want to learn, so you're not in that lecture or in that workshop on your laptop doing your emails or thinking about your cases. You're there fully participating in the group. And so that is just for some of the reasons why it's going to be the most fucking awesome program there ever was. And
It-
you're teaching there for the first year this year. So tell us about what you're going to be teaching and why, if people want to get bigger verdicts, they're going to have to come to Randy Calvert's presentation.
Okay. Well, before we talk about what we're teaching, I want to echo what you just said. If you want to be a trial lawyer, they certainly didn't teach you how to do it in law school. And if you go to Trial Lawyers University, all you have to do is learn one or two things, and you will have paid for that many times over. It's not about getting your CLE, it's about just learning one thing or two things that's going to get you a verdict that's going to establish your name as a trial lawyer.
That is what I am most looking forward to, because I've established my name as a coach, as a organizer of trial lawyers events. I think that I'm pretty sure that anybody in this space that goes to events, like when somebody says to me, well, how'd you like it? Like, oh, it's one of the best conferences I've been to. I'm like, really? Like, what would you compare it to? And they stare at me and they're like, okay, you win. It was great. It was the best, but I just don't want to pump your ego anymore. I'm like, hey, man, I got an ego. Of course we all have egos, but I'm like, I just want to know if there's someone that you think is better and why it's better. That's all I want to know. Because before I started doing my own conference, every time I go to a conference, I look and see what they're doing. I'm like, why the hell do they do that? Why do they do that? Why do they do that? Why don't they do something to get people connected? Why are they all people separating by themselves? Why is it cliquey? Why don't they do anything to get, people a chance to meet each other and make friends? Because people make friends, they do business together, because friends want their friends to win. And winning in the world of business is called making money. And, and the more friends you have, I've seen it over and over, the more money you make, because people don't refer cases to people that they don't like. They don't have them come in as co-counsel they don't like. They don't spend time on the phone consulting and coaching with people and helping them on their cases that they don't actually like. Whereas if you become friends with people, because like when people all the time, say, oh, what do I need to do to really improve my game to get great? Simple. It's three things. Number one, you got to train, but you got to train the right content. Just training itself is not enough. People think they go to the Trial Lawyers College or Spence Method and sing Kumbaya and walk around, do psychodrama for 3 weeks, that they're going to come out a trial lawyer. They're wrong. I thought I would too. I went there for 12 years. I came out a better person. People are like, you're a better person. You must have been a real fucking asshole before. I'm like, very much so. I own it. But it was great for personal growth, great for making friends, great for relaxing, great for it's like summer camp. But it's not great for becoming a trial lawyer, because you can't become a trial lawyer by standing on top of a table in front of people and reciting poetry or singing a song. Sure, you might get a little more comfortable with being in front of people doing weird shit, but that's not trial lawyering. You got to think under pressure. You got to persuade. You got to connect. And that's trial lawyering, and doing things that help you perform in the context of trial. So first, you got to train the right stuff. Second is you got to have people around you that are mentoring you, that are helping you with the content, because there's so much strategy involved. And that's why you got to put the time into things like TLU On Demand, to reading books on strategy from trial guides, to hiring consultants, doing focus groups. That's the conscious mind. But you have to learn where skills are the unconscious mind of performance. But you also need to go to conferences, because you need to surround yourself with people who are going to inspire you. When you see somebody that's just like you and they're killing it, if you're a young lawyer and you see somebody like Mike Karp, who's 32 years old and has already got an 8-figure verdict under his belt and collected it, you think, why not me? Because it's like my friend Kurt Zahner says, it's some quote from he's a big Game of Thrones, but he's like, what one man can do, another can do. And that's what's to remember. If somebody else did it, you can do it too. You just have to see what they did, study what they did, and they got lucky. They got the case. Well, get yourself in a position to get lucky. It's amazing how people, then they bust their asses 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, how lucky they can get. So those are just some of the things that people need to do to really learn to become trial lawyers. And it takes all three, and it takes it takes a relentless focus and passion and mental toughness, because on the way to the top, there are some setbacks, and you got to be able to take it. And, I remember losing 10 trials in a row one time, and like how hard that was emotionally, psychologically, what a loser I am. Why would anybody want to ever want me to represent them? It was freaking. Then when I finally won one, I started crying. And the client was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you care so much." I'm like, "It's for me. It's not for you. I'm probably not a loser anymore." But anyways, so sorry, I had to just about the training, because everybody wants to train, everybody wants to get better, but they don't really know what to do. If you don't know what to do, you could spend all that time. I spent 12 years going out to that ranch thinking, people are like, "You're still coming here as a student?" I'm like, "A slow learner," but it was like I was having fun and meeting people. So
You have to learn the fundamentals, and practice does not make perfect. It just practice makes permanent. And
yes.
so you've got to be out there trying to learn the correct way to do the fundamentals.
Yes, I think there's a best practices for every skill set. There's a best practices for witness preparation, which leads to a great direct examination. You cannot do a great direct examination unless your client is fully prepared. There's a best
Yeah.
practices for cross-examination. You can't do a great cross-examination unless you think about it. You write it out ahead of time. You think about the word choice you want to use, how you want your inflection of your tone to be, what you want your emotional state to be, how you want your hands and body to move, what visuals are you using, how are you going to use those things. People don't think about this stuff. They just get up and say, "Oh, it's all going to come to me." I'm like, "Yeah, right." Nothing just comes to you.
In trying a case, it's not any one thing. You can't go to one seminar and learn one thing, because it's what you say. It is, it's case selection, it's focus groups, it's depositions, it's voir dire, cross-examination, direct. I mean, there are so many different aspects, and you have to learn the correct fundamentals for each one of those.
And you have to do focus groups. And, like I do focus groups. When I help people with focus groups, though, they have done their concepts. They know what their story's about. It's like, okay, I do performance focus groups, which is, get a group of jurors, and I put a couple plants in there who are lawyers who are going to ask the cuff questions. Like when somebody asks for $20 million, they're going to say, that's a crazy amount of money. And I think you're just being greedy, because the people that you're paying often don't say that, the stuff that people are really thinking and really, but that way the lawyer has to practice handling those attacks in the moment, in the heat. Right. But also practice their voir dire that they're going to do, because language is all patterns. You've got to practice their opening. How big a chunk do they give to each juror? What visuals they're using? Do they, how to best use the visuals when you're using them? All these things. This is what we practice. And then we have to practice the direct examination of the plaintiff so that they can understand what it feels like to be talking about these losses and this emotional strife in front of people. Practice cross-examinations of a couple of experts so a person can get comfortable telling the story through the cross, creating the illusions in the cross, and looping, practicing their looping, because people don't
Yeah.
practice that looping or the double direct, whatever you call it. They don't do it naturally. You don't naturally repeat the last fact that you stated
No.
in the next sentence unless you train yourself. So that's the kind of training I do in my focus groups. So a little bit different. So how do you, when you run your focus groups, we were talking about that, and and this is what you're gonna be teaching about in Huntington Beach. So what is it that you've learned about focus groups and how to do them and how to put them together that you're going to be, sharing with, people who have not the experience that you have?
I think one of the most important things that people miss is you need to do focus groups early. Do focus groups before you do depositions. Early in the case, do a concept focus group where you slowly unpack the facts, find out what the jurors know about this area, what questions do they have, how do they view these facts, how do they view the parties, and because by the time you start taking depositions, you need to know your case theme. You need to have goals and objectives for the examination in those depositions. And in order to do that correctly, I think you should have done, one or two concept focus groups.
All right. And then, you've done your one or two concept focus groups. So how do you go best about putting together these concept focus groups and running them so that you get the the information you need to build your case properly.
Yeah, if you don't have the right jurors, you're not going to get good information. And I am totally opposed to trying to get jurors from, day labor agencies or unemployment agencies or Craigslist and what we landed on about 10 years ago, I set up a company to solicit focus group participants, and we do direct mail to people that have voted in person multiple times recently. And we do it to each precinct so that we get, a sampling of demographics. And we pay the focus group participants well. And
So when you say you
I
pay
did
them
one.
well, what does paying them well mean? Because for some people, paying but somebody $50 for 2 hours is paying them well. And
Yeah, post COVID, we increased it dramatically. We pay $175 now,
$175 for the day,
4 hours.
4 hours. Okay, you know what? Pays for the parking, pays for the gas, and
Yeah,
you're gonna find a better quality of people at that rate.
absolutely. I did one recently. 10 of the 12 had college degrees.
Wow, that's amazing. All right, and so where you get your pool from isn't critical. Okay, so after you get the right pool of jurors, then what?
Never reuse them.
All right.
And, it's critical that they not know which side you're on. And so, we always do it at a neutral location at a hotel. And a lot of times I maybe stretch it a little bit and I tell them that I've been hired to help try to get this case resolved. I'm a mediator. I've got gray hair. And so these parties have asked me, but there's some issues that are stopping us from being able to get it to a resolution. Your input's going to help us help the parties to try and maybe see the other side of it, and hopefully you can help them resolve this matter. And so they have no idea, which side I favor.
Okay, and so then when you got that all set up, how do you go about, conducting to get the information that you need to properly craft your case?
Well, again, my favorite type of focus group is the concept focus group. And I literally sit down eye to eye with them, same level, and we just start slowly unpacking the case, the facts. I want to know, you always have to make sure you answer every juror's question during a trial. So you need to know what those questions are. You need to know what they know about this topic, which is surprising. Sometimes, they have a lot more knowledge about something that you think's a complicated issue than you would expect. You need to know what questions they have, and then just, their view of the world. Sometimes that's enough. You just do one, and you've got a pretty good idea of the lay of the land of the case, and you can go start taking your depositions. Sometimes you're surprised, and maybe it's going a completely different direction than you expected. And when you do a focus group, the order of how you deliver information to them as you unpack it will affect their answers later. We all know the importance of the order of proof, right? And so, maybe in the first one, you learn that things are completely different than you thought. So you need to do a second one in order to deliver the information to them in a different order, to see how they react to it. Then, once you're farther along in the case, when you get towards the end of the case, deliberative focus groups like what you're talking about work well. You can do an opening statement and see how they react to it. Or you can have two different lawyers doing closing arguments and monitor the deliberations. And then, unfortunately, it is hard to get into the courtroom. That trying to get trial dates from judges. It, it's and so we don't try as many cases as we'd like to. And so bring a focus group in and practice your voir dire. It's like hitting practice balls before you go out to play.
I couldn't agree with you more because, like when people like do these focus groups and I feel like they're less kind of like spitting and jiving, but they're not doing shit that they prepared. They're like, oh, I'm just trying to get comfortable. I'm like, well, you have to think on your feet as a trial lawyer. So you have to be intentional and deliberate with what you're doing. So when you're not just going to like spitball with a jury. You're going to ask specific questions, frame them a certain way, listen to their answers, and you have to, and every answer is the best response. It's, it's either dig deeper, spread it. Who else feels this way? I understand why you feel this way. Whatever it is, you just got to be in the moment. You can't do that unless you're doing prepared material.
Right. And then, exhibits and videos, demonstratives, you need to try those out.
Right.
I was helping a friend on a one recently, and there was a national law firm involved. So they sent someone in to watch, and they had only hired focus group companies, that had done deliberations, and charged them $25,000. And we started doing this concept focus group and unpacking it. And he just couldn't believe the amount of information he was getting. It was a trucking case, and everything's going along, well. And then we started showing them some exhibits, some little video clips. Once we started showing video clips, they went completely off the rails. In this case went, the value of that case went up 10 times in the second half after the break. Because in the first half, where you're just talking about things, they had you could feel the sentiment in the room. Once they saw these video clips, they were just, infuriated. And we all know, the key to big verdicts, you got to make the jury mad, right?
Like Brian Panish says, because I said to Panish when I first met him during the beginning of the pandemic, I never really met him in person, but we started doing these webinars together. I'm like, Panish, what's your strongest skill in the courtroom? You know what he said to me? All of them. I'm like, okay, of course, all of them, Brian. But if we had to pick one, what would it be? He goes, cross. I know how to find the friction. I'm like, all right, that's what we're going to talk about, cross then. But anyways, so it's all about finding the friction. We agree. And so when
I would say that slightly differently.
Okay.
A trial is all about the jurors. And it's all about what they're going to go home and tell their friends and family about what they did.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. That was saying it differently, but that's saying it very differently. It's a whole different concept, actually, than finding the friction. But I can agree with you on that too.
The highlight of TLU for me was having the opportunity to network with attorneys from out of state.
TLU has been amazing. I'm so glad I came. It was one of the most inspiring events I've been to. Great networking, great food. It's been amazing. I can't wait for next year.
So when people come to your presentation in Huntington Beach, what are the walkaways that you see them leaving with as to, the benefit? Because they have 12 choices. So if they choose Randy Calvert, what is their takeaway from spending that hour with you and watching the other presentations on video?
All the fundamentals are important. And so they need to learn everything. The reason focus groups are important, I mean, how many people have you heard after they lose a case say, well, you just never know what a jury's going to do?
I think that's such a loser thing to say. It's like, you do know if you tested it and you refined it, it's not a mystery.
Focus groups are critical first to make sure that you maximize the value of your case. But most importantly, make sure you don't lose.
Yeah. Losing is a little expensive, and I've heard, and I'm joking, I've lost, but losing is the worst. I just released a podcast today with my buddy Kurt Zahner, who got defensed on a 6-week trial that was on CBN, that he had a significant amount of money, but more than money, he had his life force capital invested in. So, and it was his first civil loss at, out of 20 trials. And so, because when you win 19 in a row, obviously it's good for your ego, it's good for your self-image, it's good for your momentum. And you've never gotten punched in the face before. That's why the title for the podcast was Losses. They either make you or they break you. You decide.
Let's put this in perspective. Just because you do focus groups doesn't mean you're going to win your case. But sometimes you focus it, and what you figure out is this is a good case to settle.
You're right. This is not a good case to try. No, that's some of the most valuable information, is knowing when to settle. Or, and my friend Joe Freed, he lost a trial, but he's like, but we had a high low. But the fact to have the insight to be able to read the jury, read the room, and get yourself into a high-low position to protect your client and protect yourself too. I mean, that takes a lot of experience and skill. You know what I mean? To be able to read the room like that, to know what's going to happen before it happens.
And so you have to practice in the deposition. You practice in motion hearings. You practice at the grocery store. That's why you have a family. You practice on them. You have to keep the skill up or it erodes. It's simple as that.
Somebody give us an overview of this case.
Or I call wowing it. And what I mean by wisdom of the wise is, why are we still right in spite of this fact?
These are just some of the clips when I was cross-examined 10 years ago, remember?
About 11 o'clock at night, and he leaves this message. I got a brilliant idea. Every conversation he starts, I have a brilliant idea.
But welcome, everybody. We've got a good crowd here today.
Randy, when people come and spend this time with you, what are their takeaways going to be about focus groups?
We're going to teach them everything they need to know about how to find the right jurors, which is critical, all the different ways to run a focus group, how to set it up, and then how to analyze what you're hearing, get the correct information, make the changes to your case, maybe run more focus groups, but at the end, making sure that you've got the right information to present the case properly and simply tell the story to the jurors. Again, it's all about the jurors. It's about what they're going to go home and tell their friends and family about what they did.
I was just talking to a buddy of mine, Ash, and he's like, becoming a lawyer. He's like, one thing that people don't want to acknowledge is that trial is a show. It's a performance. And if you don't realize that, if you think it's just about the facts and being authentic, you're freaking dreaming, and you're going to get punched in the face more times until you realize that you got to be more than just authentic and have the evidence and the facts. And so I think they kind of go right along the same strand.
And if you think about human nature, everyone's interested in themselves.
Ain't that the truth?
And so, you know, the jurors, they're like, oh, isn't it sad that man lost his leg in that accident? I wonder what my wife will want to do for dinner tonight. And as much as people want to get off of jury duty, they never stop talking about the time they were on a jury. And it's all about what they're going to go home and tell their friends and family about what they did. There was this insurance company, and they wouldn't pay this claim, and they and this happened. And let me tell you what we did.
Got it. So Randy, I just finished a boot camp at my condo here that's behind me. It was 4.5 days, and it was only 6 students and a couple of jurors. We had a couple of law students for the first time too. Because a couple of law students called me and said, hey, can we come sit in on your boot camp so we can start learning? I'm like, absolutely. I mean, and so what was different, what I really, this 4.5 days was, how we sequenced the training, because the structure of learning is so critical of how, at what stage you get the information, and to develop basic skills and then build upon those skills. And like you said, if you can learn 1 or 2 things, I used to say that, but my goal is to change people's lives with everything that I do. With this boot camp, with the live conference, when somebody calls me, I'm like, how was it? Like, it changed my life. I'm like, music to my ears. Tell me how. Well, X, Y, and Z. Or, even this one vendor, I call him up, he calls me about, he does search engine stuff. And I asked him about, how was the conference for you, Vegas? He goes, it changed my life. I'm like, really? He's like, I got 2 new clients from there, or maybe 3. If I could do that at every conference, my whole world would be different. I'm like, if you could do it at every conference, your world will be different. But, not every conference is TLU. So it's easy to meet. It's easy to meet people and hang out and connect with them. Of course, it's easier to do business. I mean, they're your friends. Your friends want you to win. But so how we sequence information is critical. So here's how our boot camps go now. Because I'm super pumped too, because we're doing a boot camp before Huntington Beach for 4.5 days with this guy, Dave Clark, who's my mentor, who taught me about the unconscious mind, conversational hypnosis, Milton Erickson, NLP, and all that kind of stuff. But the rhetoric and the framing, because he studied under Jerry Spence for 20 years. Oh, I'm doing a boot camp at Carter Mario. It's a law firm out of Connecticut. It's going to be my first full 5-day firm boot camp, because I've been working on this concept of developing a complete training program, but as efficiently as possible, because, people are like, 5 days, that's forever. I'm like, 5 days? to become a trial lawyer? Are you fucking kidding me? People work their whole lives and don't make that, don't make progress because they're not working on the right stuff. But you work on the right stuff for 5 days, it will change your life. It will change your life. I got an email from this, Kyle from Minnesota. First thing was, thank you so much. This changed my life. And then he went on to ask a few more questions, but I'm like, but how we sequence it. So we start off there's 6 weeks of Zoom meetups. That's critical. So when everybody gets there, they got a real good idea what's going on. And so they have a base of information and knowledge upon which to build, a framework to accept new information. People that don't do that, they're like lost, you know what I mean? And they never catch up because there's too much processing. The idea is you got to know the content and the basics before you get here so that all of your bandwidth can be used up performing. And what do I mean by performing? I mean controlling your facial expressions. So when you say good morning to everybody, you have a warm face. Or when you ask a question, you have an inquisitive face. And that when you control your hands so that you're not just standing going like this with your hands the whole time you're talking, like you're angry or frustrated, that we train ourselves, when we connect with people to just use one hand, keep our one hand between ourselves and the person we're trying to connect with. Things like that. And, train ourselves to speak a little more slowly in training. Because some people see my training, like, oh, it feels mechanical. It's so slow. I'm like, of course it is mechanical. I am training. I am not performing. When I'm performing, things speed up. When I'm training, we must slow down for A, the discipline of the slowing down, and B, so that everybody can see that we're training what we're doing. Because at full speed, it's hard to see everything. And so you have everything on training, because like I study training a lot. Like this book right here, Peak, is, a big foundation. It's the secrets from the new science of expertise and high performance. And so like the sequence which you get information is critical. So that's where we get started with witness prep and direct examination. I used to teach witness prep and consult on witness prep like before the pandemic for years. Like I used to go around and work with people's witnesses. But for me, a great direct is all about great witness prep, and everybody's got their philosophies. And I love watching somebody's like, oh, I prep witness for a living. I'm like, really? Show me what you do. And so, because everybody's got their own way, and if people are paying them to do it, they got to have something people like, right? And that's how I look at it. And so when I prep witnesses, my goal is to somewhat put them into like you can call it a trance-like state, you can call it whatever. But anyways, it's to transport themselves back in space and time to answer and relive the event from there. And so that way, if they do that, then they're emotionally congruent, right? Their faces match the emotion of the case. Their hand movements move with what's going on. They speak in the present tense without being told to speak in the present tense. And then that way they're impenetrable to cross-examination. Because after I do the preparation with them in like kind of like a free-flowing with their eyes closed narrative, then we change that to a question and answer format, right? Because I tell them, look, you can't just talk without being asked questions. So we have to do this in a question and answer format. And so the way that we do this is that there's going to be 4 steps to being a great witness. Step number 1, whenever you're asked a question, either by myself or the other side, first, make sure you understand the question. If you don't, ask for clarification. Step number 2, then we ask ourselves, what image must I access in order to answer the question? Then while accessing the image, answer the question. When you're done, close the image up and come back to me, and I'll know you're ready for the next question. And if you do this, I always tell them, if you do this, you'll be impenetrable to cross-examination. And I take my phone out. I said, for example, if I said my phone is purple. Isn't that true? What would your answer be, Randy?
I see black.
It's purple, right? Just look at it.
I'm not seeing purple.
Right. And notice your demeanor. You're not being defensive. You're talking to me like I'm confused. Either I'm colorblind or I don't understand the difference between the words or meanings of purple versus black. But either way, I'm not a bad guy. I'm just confused. And that defense lawyer, he's confused too. And he's not a bad guy, but we're just going to unconfuse him. And so now with that mindset, the witness is like, yeah, we're going to unconfuse him. But that way they're not getting defensive, because nothing's worse than when a witness gets defensive with the other side. I mean, we lose all credibility. So that's some basic fundamentals on witness prep and direct. Obviously, it's much more into that. So I'm going down to Dallas to do this for a couple of days at this law firm. And like, I haven't done this, professionally in a while. So I'm like, I got to hone my shit up and make sure I'm delivering a superior product when I get down there. So that's on the witness prep. So that's where we started. But then after that, we moved to cross-examination. What would you say are the fundamental skills of cross-examination?
Well, first, you have to know your objectives. And I assume everyone is using Friedman's rules at this point. And, Friedman talks about how his rules it keeps the jury and the judge focused. More importantly, it keeps the lawyer focused. You need to have an objective, not, the rules are your top line, but then you break it down into subtopics, whatever you want to call them, chapters, outlines. And each one of those, you need to have those building blocks in your mind before you begin, so that every question you asked is in furtherance of that. Once you know that, then you can start focusing on looping. You're only asking one fact per question, and then you're carrying that fact forward to the next question, but always keeping in mind where you are in your outline. What building block, what fact are you trying to establish here? And probably one other fundamental that people miss so often is you need to look at every adverse witness for what they can do to help you tell your story. Don't just go in guns blazing, trying to discredit or attack. That witness has some things some facts that will help you to tell your story. And it's much more effective when they present those facts to the jury than when your witnesses do. And so cooperate with that witness. Let them help you tell your story.
My friend used to say, when you get a fact from your own witness, it's worth 1 point. When you get it from the defense, it's worth 2, maybe 3, depending on the fact. And so I agree with everything you said, but most of what you said, in my interpretation, it would be strategy, how to sequence the questioning, what questions specifically to ask. So what you did mention looping, you did mention one new fact per question. So you did mention those, and I highly agree with those. But here's the things that I would add as far as skills go. I would also add leading questions only. I know it's a basic, but I see so many lawyers ask questions that begin with a verb, like, what color was the car? It's like you're just begging for a narrative. Asking your questions in the present tense. Most people cannot do that. They cannot, because it forces the questioner to visualize the story. It forces the witness to visualize the story, but more important, allows the jury to actually picture the story, to drop the taglines like right, correct, isn't it true, true. Or if you must use a tagline because what you statement is not clearly a question, or it could be, is to simply have a pause and then say true. Because after a couple of times of doing that, the witness gets it and you're like, your eyes, and they go, true, right? Because as soon as you do your eyebrows, you flip the hand, you start to make a hand motion to throw them the true. They're like, true, okay, good. You train them, right? Being intentional with our emotional states, because there's only 2 emotional states that dominate cross, and those are not anger and frustration, obviously. If you get either of those emotions, that's like you've given the little witness a little remote control to push your buttons. But they are inquisitive or curiosity, same thing. And so that way when we're laying foundations, that most people skip over, laying the foundations before they do the impeachment. After they impeach, then they want to say, well, you're supposed to do it like this. Well, it's not nearly as impactful as if you talk about they're supposed to do it first, because they're just saying yes, 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 because they can't. But as soon as it gets confrontational and you show that they're, dishonest, then they're like, oh, well, now we're, going on forever to explain away and trying to, mush up and confuse things. Oh, also effectively using a flip chart, which means writing legibly and putting one topic per page, bringing the jury in. So when you ask a question, you look at the jury while asking that question, it's impactful. Many people are used to, comfortable just asking all the questions to the jury. I am not. And dropping all the filler words like and, so, okay, that people, they'll never drop those unless they actually train themselves to drop them. So what we do, Randy, is that we train this by a set piece of cross. And so I developed this set piece of cross on examining the defense medical expert to teach all these skills. And so that way we have people, we do a Zoom ahead of time where we show them, explain all the moves that we're doing. And then the students record themselves, with a flip chart, with a witness playing the witness, and, doing the scripts in segments. So that way we break it into 4 segments, that we can review each segment in smaller pieces. And so by the time they get here, they're familiar with, at least the foundations of what they're doing, why they're doing it. Now we can work on their performance. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. It's perfect. And all of those skills, you have to learn all of them.
I know. And so you're going to be Dr. Calvert, and I'm going to demonstrate this cross, because after I demonstrate the cross, then I'm going to share with you the huge innovation that we developed here because, it's rare that I get really excited about something learning wise in this because I do it so much and, learning is so incremental. I make a little change. I'm like, ooh, this is great. But when there's when there's seismic change, which I think we developed here, then it's exciting. So I'm going to demonstrate and explain this cross-examination of the defense medical expert. And then I'm going to show you how we took that same set of skills we developed to cross-examine the maintenance guy who chose not to salt the sidewalk before somebody broke their neck. So you're going to be Dr. Calvert. Doctor, you're a board certified medical expert.
Yes.
To become board certified, this requires advanced education.
Yes.
This education, it took place both while you were in medical school and after you got out.
That's correct. I did a residency and a fellowship.
But while you were in medical school, you did take classes.
Yes.
One of the classes that you took was on how to conduct a proper medical evaluation.
That was a number of different classes, and practice.
Okay, so that's segment one. So what did we learn in segment one? We learned looping. Oh, another thing I forgot is mention pacing. Like we train to slow down, to be intentionally slow with your speech and to pause intentionally because we all know the pressure of the courtroom speeds everything up no matter what you do. So we try to train down. Looping, every question begins where the last question ended. And I raise my eyebrows, I open my hand up, and it looks like I'm throwing you the question, right? So that's the first chunk. Second chunk is you're trained that a proper medical evaluation, it must be impartial.
Yes.
So if I had a flip chart right here, the first page would be blank, and then I flip it over, and it says at the top, proper. And it's underlined. I write number 1, impartial in capital letters, and I put a number 2. Queuing up to the jury, stay curious, more is coming. And I space it out so that by the time I get to number 3, it's going to take up the whole page. So we get just one topic per page. Doctor, by impartial, what we mean is that you're not an advocate for either side.
No, I'm here to give my best professional opinion.
So now we're defining this term impartial for the jury because it's different between an expert witness and a trial lawyer than it is, let's say, in a football game, in a referee, or let's say in a musical, recital or a skating recital, what impartiality means in that context. Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation, it must not only be impartial, I look at it, that's called glance control, but it must also be objective. Just say yes. That'll make it easier on you, Doc. Okay. And so, because you can't say no. And so I write down objective, of course, like I did before. Then I put number 3. Then I'm going to define it just because I have parallel structure. By objective, what we mean is that you don't cherry pick the evidence to support a desired opinion.
I look at all the facts.
Doctor, you're trained that a proper medical evaluation must not only be impartial and objective, but it must also be complete.
Yes.
And notice how I pause every time before complete, before I said impartial, before I said objective, so it stands out. And then I write it down. And when you write on a board like that, especially when you stand in front of it, it causes what's called, we can define as an anticipation trance. The jury stares, and then they think, yep, he wrote just what I thought he was going to write. Oh, I fulfilled that. I fulfilled that desire of theirs, right? And by complete, what we mean is that you consider all relevant information.
I consider all the facts in my opinion.
So Randy, how many years you been a lawyer? 30?
35.
35. In your 35 years as a trial lawyer, how many defense experts have you ever come across that based upon those definitions, you would say were impartial, objective, and complete?
0.
0, exactly. But they're all going to have to admit say that they are. Because if they say, no, I'm a paid whore. Are you kidding me? Would they give me money? I dance, baby. They lose all credibility, right? But now we've created the pressure on them because we got them to lie. And we got them to lie openly, questions that were clear as frickin' day. And they just lied through their teeth. And now their cortisol is rising because they know you're prepared. This isn't not your first time doing this because you have it pre-written. Because then you say, doctor, the opposite of a proper medical evaluation, one that's impartial, objective, and complete, well, that would be a biased evaluation.
I won't disagree with that, no.
Okay. And you're trained and you know that there are certain risks associated with a paid expert's choice to conduct a biased medical evaluation.
But I'm not treating the patient. But my reports are my best opinion, my best professional opinion.
No, I understand that, but you know that one of those risks is that the jury, this is where I turn to the jury, that I say could be misinformed about the patient's condition.
But
I'm not saying you, I'm saying
yeah, I
generally
don't.
speaking.
I,
Other experts, not you though.
right. No, it certainly would. I would never mislead the jury.
Never, never. Doctor, because and the reason why that you would never mislead the jury is because you know that if a paid expert was to choose to do a biased medical evaluation, not only could it, misinform the jury about the patient's condition, but it could also mislead them as to the extent of the patient's injuries.
That's possible. Yes.
Right. I write misinformed on the board, and then I put number 2, mislead. So mislead's worse than misinformed. And then I put number 3, of course. And what's worse than misinforming and misleading somebody, Randy? Well, let's find out. Doctor, you're trained and you know. So that's called stepping. You're trained, you're not trained, but you know this. It's like a universal truth. Because what's a betrayal? Knowing it's wrong, knowing the risk and doing it anyways, right? And so that if a paid expert chooses to conduct a biased medical evaluation, not only could the jury be misinformed about the patient's condition and they could be misled as to the extent of the patient's injuries, but perhaps worst of all, they could be deceived into undervaluing the human harms and suffering that were caused. I know you don't want to answer this question, Doc, because I know you did this purposely, but just go ahead and just say yes.
Was that a question?
Let me ask you this question. On December 24th, 2022, you had a choice to make. So why don't you tell us all, what did you choose to do?
I conducted a complete and thorough examination.
So you're telling us so if I'm clear, what you're telling us and what you're telling this jury is that you chose to do a proper medical evaluation, one that was, and I flipped the chart over so it makes a big rustling noise, draws attention, impartial, objective, and complete, like you were trained to do, and you didn't choose to violate your training and conduct a biased evaluation because and I flipped the page over, because you were aware of all these risks. Is that what you're telling us?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, why don't you come up here and put your initials on this board right here so we're clear. Now I've got these great demonstratives for closing, right? And that's what I call a foundational chapter. They can't get away from it. It could be adjusted to any expert because the only difference you have to change is what are the risks? Let's take a biomechanical expert. The jury can be misinformed about the forces involved in the crash. And if they're misinformed about the forces involved, then they definitely could be misled about the potential for injury. And then, because that's how they talk about the potentials. And if they're misinformed about the forces and the potential and misled about the potential for injury, well, sure enough, they could be deceived into undervaluing the human harms and suffering that were caused. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter what the expert is. It can be adjusted. And this I consider to be what I call a blueprint. And so that way it can be changed. It can be adjusted. This is what I call a starting point. People are like, oh, I don't like this. I'm like, change whatever you want. I don't give a shit. Make it your own. Own it. Because then this is what it led to, which was most exciting. Like the two things we just did. So then on the third day, so the first day we did the witness prep, the second session we did the cross-examination, the third session we did the opening statement. There's a dash cam video of a motorcycle crashing into a truck and this guy getting killed and photos from the scene. And then after that, we work on, the people bring cases, right? That they worked on just the story of it. And so the story of this one case was that this case it happened in Minnesota. And so, it was snow and ice on the ground, and the guy who does the maintenance lives there, but he came out and shoveled the sidewalk, but he never salted it. And so this was the foundation for that cross, or the setup for it. And so this is what it looks like. So imagine you're the witness. We're going to imagine that the jury is to my right. Okay. Just for purposes of having a jury. And so if the jury is to my right and you're the witness in front of me, then my canvas is to my left. The areas where I can create the story for the jury is to my left. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now if you're the maintenance man, so you're maintenance man, Randy, okay? Randy, you're the maintenance man at the Eaton Square Apartments.
Yes, sir.
The Eaton Square Apartments, that's a 4-story building, and it has two glass doors in the front.
Yes.
One of your responsibilities as a maintenance man is that when it snows, that you have to go to the storage room, grab a shovel, bring it back, and shovel the walkway.
Yes, sir.
You not only have to shovel the walkway, but you have to go back and grab the bucket of salt and bring it back and salt the sidewalk.
Yes. I mean, if it needs it, yeah.
Well, it's important to salt the sidewalk because if the temperatures drop, it could cause ice to form.
It could, yeah.
You know that if ice forms, that it can get real slippery.
Yes, sir.
And this ice, it's not only slippery, but when you look at it, it's clear, so it's difficult to see.
Yeah, it can be.
And the reason why you have to salt it and prevent the ice is that way, the people that are living in the apartment, when they come out, the ice that they can't see won't cause them to slip and fall.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Right. Because if somebody falls like that, especially if they're older, they can get seriously injured.
Yeah, they could.
Okay, so let's talk about what happened on December 17th, 2021 at about 8:30 at night. Okay? So anyways, that was the story. And so you can see that's what I was doing. I don't know if you can really tell or not, but creating space over onto the left here. So it's basically painting a canvas for the jury of the story. Obviously, I'm always in the present tense. When people are leaving, coming back, with the bucket of salt, I'm looking at the bucket of salt, and then I look back at the witness. So I'm constantly connecting with him and bringing him into my illusion, hence bringing the jury into the illusion of the story.
Right.
And so that's something that very few people I've ever seen do. Like actually, create the performance. I've seen him do it, like really good lawyers. I see him do it opening and closing, but never on cross and direct. And so this key skills on cross or direct. So then for like the directive of the plaintiff, right? So now it's like, Randy, now I want to talk to you about the day, December 18th, 2022. And just to be clear, that's the day that the ice forms on the sidewalk, causing you to slip and hurt yourself. Okay?
Okay.
So on this day, you'd been living at Manor Square Apartments for approximately 4 years.
That's right.
And every time that it snows, you know that the maintenance man, Mohammed, not only shovels the sidewalk and salts it, but salts it too.
They do, yes.
And because he salts the sidewalk, that keeps ice from forming on it in case the temperature drops.
Yes.
And so in all the years you lived there, as you walked out, whether it's snowfall, no matter what's happening, you walk onto that, before this date, that sidewalk has always been clear of snow and ice and safe to walk on.
It always had been, yes.
So tell us what happens on this day when you come out. So anyways, so basically, that's another skill right there, like asking predicate questions that nobody's going to argue with, that are clearly established through previous testimony, but just not asking it in an open narrative sort of way, dragging the story, right? We get to, because everything's given there. Now let's talk about what you need to tell us about when you walk out that day. Woo, everything happens, right? And so that way it helps the witness. First of all, it creates calmness in the witness because you are guiding the story. You're not just saying, then tell us what happened. You know what I mean? And you're guiding the jury too. So then we use this story that we created, because then, I have the people do the story of their case after, like, on the third day, and it's decent. But then when we videotape it and then spend a half an hour reconstructing it, creating like on this one, we created the office building and everything on in his opening, right? He told the story and put up the office building and perfectly walking out and what the thing. And so it's basically retelling the story, but not just the words, but the illusion of the story, right? So you made the people witness to the story multiple times. Now they can't be talked out of it. They witnessed it. And so you can't talk somebody out of an experience. And so, Randy, that is going to be it for your trial lessons this day. So I hope some of it made sense at the end. I'm always trying to explain this stuff. I'm going to be teaching on this stuff, in Huntington Beach myself, because, sometimes I feel a little bit disingenuous and hypocritical talking about skills that you have to develop, yet doing it in a lecture format where everybody's just watching and nobody's practicing shit. But in my defense, there are 8 workshop tracks. So once you see the skills, you can still go sign up for it and learn a little bit of it and start opening your mind and your physical body to the idea of actually learning skills and not just getting knowledge. So anyways, Randy, that's what I got to share back with you. So it's been great visiting with you. I can't wait to see you in Huntington Beach, because I'm just, I always say to somebody asks me, are you coming to Huntington Beach? And they say no. You know what I ask him, Randy? Why the fuck not? Are you kidding me? Don't you want to be great? Don't you want to make a bunch of new friends and learn stuff that's going to change your life? Because if that's what you want, that's what we're delivering here at Huntington Beach. So, Randy, we'll see you in approximately 20 days, Tuesday,
That's
June
correct.
3rd, the arrival of, what's the plane you're flying in on?
It's a Cicada TBM 850.
Cicada. And how many of your friends you bringing with you from Oklahoma City?
In the airplane, I'm bringing 4.
Do you have room for Big Daddy if I could convince him to come?
JW?
JW.
It might be a little tight. We might be able to
How about
squeeze.
if he goes on a diet first? No, I'm
There
joking
you
around. All right. I love JW. All right. Well, I'm going to convince him to fly commercial then. All right. Well, thanks, Randy. Good seeing you, and I'll see you in a couple weeks.
Great. See you then. Look forward to it.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.